The 1950s were unlike any time period in history. So much change in the 1950s, and not just politically or culturally. It changed the Earth's geometric diastrophe irrevocably. Molten lava has a higher albedo now. The events of the 1950s literally changed geographical processes.
When we think of the 1950s, what images come to mind? Rock and roll and television? Maybe the mass production of cars or the birth of the American suburb? Maybe even the communist threat or the rise of early civil rights leaders? These images, while socially relevant, are just the results of a geological process that started millions of years before humanity. In order to fully understand the era and its impact on the interaction of chemicals today, we have to go deeper. We need to go beneath the surface.
The 1950s.
Wiggle your hands, wiggle your toes. That's the way the jazz goes. Feel the swing, you feel the buzz, you feel the rhythm of the jazz hunt. The swing goes right the beat starts to get you off your feet. All right, boys, grab your stones and get ready to swing.
The 1950s had its share of social and cultural shifts. There's no doubt about that. And political phenomena, the Red Scare, the Cold War, there's nothing more politically tense than that. What makes the 1950s so unique is the science behind the era. And I'm not talking about technology, I'm talking about the physical science, earth science.
So go on down to Macy's and get your scooter today. Only $19.95.
Exploitation of the Earth's natural resources is part of every culture. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with that. What was problematic was the degree in which we depleted the Earth's natural scooter deposits.
Scooters as we know them today take millions and millions of years to generate in a geological process called Skew Sin.
Sedimentary compaction deep in the Earth's core pressurizes magmatic alloy, allowing molecules to create a cylindrical metallic solid. The mass of this solid is less than the mass of the surrounding liquid, so, like ice in a glass of water, it floats to the top. As it rises, the cylinder rotates in 2 dimensions relative to 90 degrees. This allows the magma to melt away the less dense crystalline in positions of stagnancy. When the cylindrical L-shaped remains reach the asthenosphere, it begins the extrusion process, allowing remnants of plasticine to form spherically on either end of the flattened lower belt and to conglomerate at the upper cylinder extremity protrusions. This formation is extruded all the way to the continental crust. External processes like atmospheric circulation, tectonic shifts, and low-pressure windstorms erode the surrounding sedimentary rock, leaving what we recognize as a scooter.
Here's an experiment that you can do with your scooter at home. First, you want to be sure that your scooter is a naturally mined one, and not one of those cheap synthetic ones. In a lab setting, we would perform an acid test to ensure authenticity. If a few small sedimentary drops appear, we know the scooter is a dud. A small fire has started. We've got ourselves the real deal. We know you can't risk starting a small fire at home, so it's probably best to just whack it with a hammer a few times. doesn't bend or break, you know your scooter is pure. In a common kitchen pot, mix 1 part water with 3 parts pear juice. Boil. Once it's boiling, add sugar and stir until you have a thick syrup. This will take the place of the sedimentary rock in the ecological process. Leave it in the fridge overnight. Now, pour 4 parts of your favorite child-appropriate alcoholic beverage, like beer or wine, into a bowl. Submerge 4 plastic clasps into the liquid, allowing them to dissolve overnight. This will take the place of the magma in our experiment. But don't refrigerate that one. Now, pour the beer/plastic fastener mix into the pot, stirring as you pour. With those mixed well, we're ready to test your scooter. Using a brush, thoroughly coat your scooter with a thin layer. Be sure you get every last little spot. Now, stand back and watch as your scooter reverts back to its original mineral form.
Wait, what's gonna happen? No! You ruined my scooter!
No, you ruined your scooter.
Well, that's all well and good, but what about Pangaea?
I'm glad you asked.
Millions of years ago, all of the land on Earth was one big landmass, a supercontinent we call Pangaea. One night, drunken alien teens were drag racing at speeds the human mind cannot conceive of. This irresponsible behavior caused one of them to crash their spaceships into the continent. This knocked the Earth 23.5 degrees off its tilt and killed all the dinosaurs. Cracks spread from the point of impact in a matter of milliseconds, sending the continents soaring across the oceans where they settled, never to move again. Drag racing would never cause a shift quite this dramatic again.
Until the 1950s.
The events of the 1950s can really all be tied back to surplus capitalism. Surplus automobile production led to false market deflation. Suddenly, people who were living in cities and didn't need cars were buying them. Drag racing represented freedom, which to the kids in the city gave them a way to express themselves in a way that the older generation didn't understand. People were scared.
Thousands of traditionalist protesters marched on Washington in the Great Status Quo Marches of 1953.
They were demanding that President Truman take action. They wanted their cities to feel safe, so they demanded that Truman meet with the Al Greaser, as it was called, to work out some sort of arrangement.
Truman would meet with the leader of Al Greaser, but when he saw a woman in a position of power, he got scared and ran away from the talks, instead opting to give the older generation the opportunity to move out of the cities. He called this opportunity the New Deal.
The federal government gave subsidies and tax breaks to anyone willing to leave the city. They were essentially giving away quality homes for free. This left the younger generation in the cities free time to create beat poetry, dance to rock and roll, smoke reefer, you name it.
And, just as the older generation predicted, this behavior incurred the wrath of God.
And that's how the Earth transformed from a sustainably habitable environment into a large ball of fire, destroying all of humanity. It all goes back to the events of the 1950s.